in sport, aren't they meant to talk, and aren't they meant to shout at each other and meant to communicate? So how do you expect them to keep their mouth closed all the time? And the person wasn't getting the fact, trying to breathe nasally when you can in that situation. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts of integrating nasal breathing into the sporting context, and maybe just breathing protocols into sporting context, maybe.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that's important, is we understand that nasal breathing can be more efficient. There are, some studies that suggest most people can work to sort of 80 or 90% of their max. And there's a nice one that Dallum did in, was it 2018, with VO2 max with triathletes that had been practicing nasal breathing, adapted to it. And then they were able to, they were working at their VO2 max test, comparing nasal breathing and mouth breathing, and they were able to do more and more efficiently with nasal breathing. And then we can get a little bit down a rabbit hole and thinking that nasal is the only way. And I've probably been there in the past before, of don't ever open your mouth. And I'll be doing stuff like running up a hill, going, and my breathing, I was managed to keep my mouth closed, but my breathing was awful during it. And how did I feel at the top of the hill? I felt horrendous because I'd made it a very stressful event. So if we understand nasal breathing as it's how we should be doing at rest, it's going to form our foundation of breathing for good quality breathing, and how we breathe during exercise is going to be built upon.
Welcome back to the Performance Through Health podcast. Today we've got David Jackson. David was an ex-professional rugby player. I think you were the fullback when I was at Nottingham Trent University, so that would have been back in 2007. I was there.
Mighty Trent University.
yeah. So I know a little bit of your backstory. I know that your career ended quite abruptly. I don't really know too much about it. And then I was trained by Tim at universities. So I know your story of co-founding the School of Calisthenics.
Yeah.
And then you made a transition over into breathwork. And for a rugby player, that's quite a profound thing to do, because big guys, you didn't really think you're going to sit down and do some breathing. So I'd love to hear a bit of your backstory before we dive into the nitty-gritties of breathing and what it means to you.
Yeah. No, it's been an interesting journey. So in 2013, I had a head injury, which was probably I'd had maybe 10 relatively serious head injuries during my career, but always made a recovery, but it was taking longer for me to recover, and it was getting easier to knock me out. And the final one was just in training, playing touch. Two of us on the same team just banged into each other trying to catch the same ball. So it wasn't even an opposition. It wasn't a tackle. It was nothing, completely innocuous. And I had a seizure. So I had a fit on the floor, on the field. One of my mates said, he was next to us. And initially he said it was about to start laughing because two of you banged in catching the ball. It just looked funny. And then I started fitting on the floor and put me in the recovery position and tried to make sure I didn't swallow my tongue. Luckily, I don't remember any of that, and I'm glad that I don't. But yeah, I actually tried to get back to playing for a few months, about 3 months or so. But I just couldn't. Anytime I tried to do anything, my symptoms were just I just couldn't shift my symptoms. I just wasn't getting any better, and it was. What's going on? So I ended up having some scan. I had some initial scans that seemed to suggest it was. And then I had an MRI this was about 6 months later, when I still wasn't improving, and I maybe 5 months later. But anyway, and that showed a scar on the brain from a bleed that I'd had, and the specialist had said, the way they put it was, there's no actual rules in rugby or laws in rugby to stop you playing again if you wanted to, but she said the consequences are serious, and worst case scenario is if your brain is damaged and you get knocked out again, that ultimately you could die, and that unfortunately does happen. In boxing, she explained, if a professional boxer can't take a standing 10 count, they have to have an MRI scan, and if anything comes up on their scan like mine did, then they take their license off them. So it made that decision very clear for me. It was I've got to give up. I was 31 at the time, so I just signed a new 2-year contract, but I was coming to the end of my career. I was very lucky that I had a long career, and very grateful for that. But yeah, it took me then like a year to be able to run without getting headaches and my symptoms. But after that, felt like I'd made a full recovery. Something I was completely unaware of until probably about 2017, 18, was the impact that concussions and head injuries have on our breathing. So I'd retrained after playing rugby to become a strength and conditioning coach, worked with my business partner, Tim Stevenson. Like I said, we were working, he was a strength and conditioning coach, working a lot in Paralympic sport after he'd done the university work with teams like yourselves, and worked with athletes up until Rio 2016, carried on doing a little bit until the last cycle with Tokyo. And sort of alongside that strength conditioning, we started the School of Calisthenics, which was bodyweight training, which was taking some of these principles that we learned and trying to have a bit of fun with our own training. And people can search what calisthenics is, but like things like handstands, muscle ups, human flags. That's why I always wanted to do a human. I'd seen a human flag. It was like someone horizontal off a pole, thinking like, is that real? Like, it just looks like when you see a photo, like, is that photoshopped? And seeing a video of someone doing it, going, okay, that's now a video, so it's probably not photoshopped. And then like, how do you do that? It just, yeah, I'd lost the love of physical training when I retired from rugby, and trying to do something exciting like that got my love for training back. Like I always thought, which was really interesting, I always thought I would, once I finished playing rugby, it was like, I love the gym, I love lifting weights. It was like, yeah, I'll just like basically do bodybuilding. That's what I'll do. Like, I just assumed that would be the case, but I massively lacked motivation once I was able to get back into training. I mean, running, it was nice to be able to run and not get headaches after, say, like a year, but I was so unfit. It was like horrible. And I actually really struggled to run like a 5K. But what's been interesting for me as I've got into the breathing and the breathwork is that running's been a beautiful tool for me to learn more about my breathing, that then is helping like restore dysfunctional breathing patterns that have come from, now I understand, and having seen where the research is on concussions and dysfunctional breathing or affecting your respiratory center. It's pretty much, if you've had a concussion, you don't have to be being knocked out like cold like I was, or have a fit or a bleed or anything. Like, a concussion can have an impact on our breathing patterns, our respiratory center. And you know, one of the papers I read, it was basically suggesting like, if you've had a concussion, it will have affected it. Like the two go hand in hand. And then there's also this relationship with the brain gut axis. So actually, that was another interesting one. I had some skin issues that are like still working on actually. So when you think of, have I made a full recovery? It's like, well, I never used to have these skin issues before my head injury. And now I do. Yeah, it's like, okay, like, and someone could argue that it's not to do that, it's going to be to do with something else. But
had you noticed the breathing, like actually, if it wasn't for going through that education and learning about the concussion and the breathing, had you noticed breathing issues related to a change after the incident?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the things that I think is really interesting with breathing, is that like, if at rest, you can breathe dysfunctionally, and like you can breathe potentially very dysfunctionally, and it's like the silent assassin. At rest, when your breathing isn't being challenged, as we sit here now, someone sat listening or watching, like the amount of oxygen you need coming in and the amount of CO2 being created, like it's not huge amounts that's going to challenge your breathing. So you can breathe really badly at rest, and you potentially like can be blissfully unaware. And it's only when your breathing starts to get challenged, you might sort of notice things. And exercise might challenge it, or stress might challenge it. And then you start to notice things like I would hold an awful lot of tension around my like neck and shoulders and upper chest, like, and that tightness coming like literally restricting range of motion at the shoulder. I mean, part of my head injury was like a whiplashing effect. So I had issues with my neck for like, for years, and sometimes still can, to be honest. But a lot of that has improved. So there was these like physical things that I wasn't resolving with like your classic, strength and conditioning. Let's stretch it, let's mobilize it, let's strengthen it, like all these things. It was like clearly not getting to the root cause for me. And then just sort of in general, it's like I feel like I'd made a full recovery, but it felt, the way I describe it is like something just wasn't quite right. And whether it's like I sort of think it's like an intuition thing or something, but I just started to, it felt like, when you're in your car and you pull off, and you're like, something's not quite right here. And then you realize the handbrake's slightly on. And so I've got like an old van that's had turned into a camper van, and it's not one of these fancy ones where if you have the handbrake on, it doesn't beep at you. Like there's none of that. You manually got to like do it. So you can pull away with the handbrake still on. And life just felt like that. Something was slightly holding me back. And I was like trying to figure out, so if something's potentially not quite right, and it's something that is, it must be something that I'm not aware that's going on, has the potential to influence like lots of things. What might, and when breathing, I don't know, for whatever, breathing started to come up as one of these things, and you'd hear someone talking about it and someone else, and you're like, okay, I'm going to look at this. And it ticks some of those boxes of like, I think having understood, at least from a strength conditioning perspective, that like, okay, breathing's a movement pattern. So, we can do any movement pattern wrong. If I'm breathing 20,000 odd times a day, if I imagined it to like doing a squat, like a bodyweight squat isn't very hard. But if I do it really bad 20,000 times during a day, like my hips and my knees are probably going to hurt. So if I'm breathing, I just started to ask the question, like, if I'm breathing wrong or slightly off, I don't really be like terrible at it, but slightly off, could that be affecting like how I'm feeling? Could that be affecting some of the tightness I'm getting around like my shoulders and neck and stuff? And I was like, yeah, probably that makes sense. Like it's worth exploring. And then my sort of the opening Pandora's box sort of started with a question of, so the next question was, okay, are you breathing right?
Yeah.
And I was just like, well, I don't know. And Google couldn't tell me straight away. So it's like, I've got to, and then it was like diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, right, get it. Am I using my diaphragm? I was like, I don't know. Like, and it was like, am I doing it right? Like I remember seeing one of my friends, a very good physio, works with like British Athletics, was like, am I breathing right? And it's like trying to, and then even someone like, I was like, I wasn't Patrick McKeown of the Oxford Advantage. So I got introduced to the Oxford Advantage by Richie Norton. Don't you come across him?
Yeah, I think we follow each other on social media.
Yeah, and he so he's trained with Oxford Advantage and XPT. I said to him, mate, I'm like, I need to know more about this breathing stuff. Like, I want to. What have you got any books you recommend? And he just straight away like didn't and out. It was like, read the Oxford Advantage. So I read that, and then I became this really annoying person that was like trying. I was like, everyone, we've got to breathe through your nose. I remember like saying to my wife's mum, so my mother-in-law, going, you've got to breathe through your nose. And she was like, what? Like, when you just, you're excited by it. So like, you don't give any rationale or explanation. It's just like, it's really important. You've got to do it. This book says you've got to do it. I'm not even very good at reading, and I did not put that book down. I read that book as fast as I've read anything. And I guess at the start, and as you said, at the start, the whole mindfulness and like practicing your breathing and all that, I found really difficult, and that wasn't what got me excited about it. I mean, years ago, I remember putting on hearing stuff about meditation really good, and it was like, I like the idea of doing meditation, that would be cool. And then like putting a meditation on YouTube, and it's just like swooshing of waves, and I was like sat there for like 1 second, was like, this ain't me, like I can't do this. So I wasn't into, the thing that got me with it was like, okay, so I'd read the book. It was like, okay, this is important. I'm trying to solve out these things. But the hook that got me was I'd got to being able to run and start, I said running at the start I couldn't do. And then I was terrible, like so unfit when I first did it. And like my missus was just like smashing me on all these runs. But I built back up, and we were doing park run, like a 5K park run once a week. And I didn't really do any training during the week for running. All my training was like bodyweight, calisthenics, bodyweight strength style stuff. But I'd do a run, we'd do a park run once a week. And nothing changed for 6 weeks, other than during my day-to-day, I was trying to nasal breathe. And whenever I did go on a run, I would try to nasal breathe, but I wasn't very good at it. My nose was all blocked. It was like snot pouring out. It was like pretty miserable. And I just like sort of like tried to push through or whatever, and just, but I was consciously trying to breathe through the nose. And I understood one of the things was that we want to stay away from this like fast panting breathing. If you're running and getting out of breath, it's much more efficient to breathe larger breaths and slower breaths, and breathing through the nose helps facilitate that. But when you first start, your nose is that blocked and that not used to it, that actually you can't, and your CO2 tolerance is that bad that you just can't handle it. So you end up mouth breathing quite quickly, but at least going big in and big out. So I went and did this 6 weeks. I'd just been trying to nasal breathe and just doing terrible at doing the basics, but just doing something. And I did this park run in Sheffield. Never been to that park run before. Crossed the finish line. I was trying to do my nasal breathing, didn't last very long. And I was like, stay doing big breaths and slower. Crossed the finish line, didn't feel like I'd done particularly well. I think I'd gone off too hard at the start, and a lot of people were passing me later on. Didn't think I'd done very well. My previous PB was like 20 minutes 15. And I crossed the finish line. I didn't even look at my watch because I was like a bit disappointed. I was like, I don't think I did very well on that. And you'd never done the course before, so you didn't know where the end was. And it was like, oh, we're at the end now. Looked at my watch after a few minutes, and I was like, I've just run 19 minutes, like 16. And I was like, hold on a minute. I could have broke 19 minutes then, because I had some left in the tank. I could have sprinted the end if I knew where the end was. And I was like, whoa, like,
there's something to this.
And I hadn't even done this right. I was like, I haven't even done it right. I've just been like doing it terribly. So I was like, that was like my hook. I was like, this is a real thing. This is important for like a sports performance, but that got me excited about that element of it. And I think and I still love that element of it. The softer things around like sleeping better, managing stress better, being more present because you are practicing. And naturally, like now I can sit down or lie down and just breathe for 10 minutes if I wanted to, because I've got this like, I'm not doing it just for the sake of just being still for the time. I'm getting that stillness, but it's been a like, I want to improve the way that I breathe, and seeing breathing as a movement pattern, as a skill to try and practice. And, you know, can I breathe with my diaphragm better? Can I do these things? And, you know, that then sort of becomes the meditation practice that I didn't have the ability to do before. And interestingly, probably very difficult to meditate before if I was breathing quite dysfunctionally, because one of the first things you'll do is like focus on your breathing. And if your breathing's difficult, it's difficult to then focus on it and breathe on it. So sorry, that's
no, thanks, Jacko. I think that just shows like, you know, two things. Obviously, we need to see results. And when you get results, it's like, okay, all of a sudden you're like, yes, that's noticeable. And I think I come at probably the opposite way to it as you. Whereas I was a respiratory scientist at Queen's Medical Centre for 3 years, and then moved to Australia. And I remember the first year I moved to Australia, someone said to me, have you read The Oxygen Advantage? And I just dismissed it. I was like, oh, no. It's like, we know everything about breathing. Like, you know, it's just all pseudoscience and stuff like that. And for a couple of years, I was really kind of naive. And I think universities sometimes put you that way a little bit, especially when you study breathing, because there's so many exercise physiologists that just believe when they see the screens that they're looking at, it's just that way, and that's the way it has to be. And all of a sudden, like, becoming a bit wiser and a bit more open, I started to recognize a pattern in a lot of my patients that would come for breathing issues. So come for lung function tests, barometry, and all those sort of things. And they come back and their lungs would be absolutely fine. And they'd be like, well, why have I got breathing problems? And I started to question, like, you know, how stressed are you? You're anxious? And like, yeah, I've got terrible anxiety, like always have. And then I start to notice people just at rest. And I'm like, hold on a second. And then it wasn't until someone put the book in front of me again and said, oh, have you read this book? And I was like, no, I'm going to have a read of it now. And it just made a sense with what was aligning with what I was seeing in the clinics. And then I had a guy come to me, same thing, breathing issues, very stressful background. I think he'd gone through testicular cancer and a pulmonary embolism, and he was on his recovery a year later, and he was just breathing heavily through the mouth, but his lung function was fine now. And I said to him, I think I can help. I think there's another way that you can do it that the doctors are not going to be able to do for you because they've not read this book that I've read and that many people have read. Do you want to give it a go? 8 weeks later, his HRV's improved. His shortness of breath had dropped by 80%. His stress levels were down. He was happy as Barry. He was honestly like, my family and friends have never seen me so calm and relaxed and peaceful and feeling good about myself. And that for me just that was maybe 2 years ago. It just clicked and I went, I'm going to keep doing this for everyone I see who doesn't get the results they want from the doctors, and I'm going to keep going.
And it's not complicated stuff. This is the thing I love about it. Like, Patrick's done a great job in making the so Patrick McKeown, the author of that book, has done a great job in bringing the research over the last sort of 20 years or so, like picking it apart or bringing it together in a way that, like, you know, it's relatively easy to understand. Even, you know, it can get complex at times, but it's the way it's put then into, like, ultimately, like, what do we need to do? What's some of the exercises to do? We can do very little with patients and clients and see some huge changes. So I work with some like professional athletes and some professional like rugby teams here in the UK, but also there's a private GP that I work with who refers on patients that she sees. We've had quite a few discussions, and she's really aware of like the breathing side of it now and how that can affect like the nervous system, how their digestive system, like inflammation, like all these things that she's looking out for those things in their story, and then she's observing their breathing. And if she sees that she's seeing like some dysfunctional breathing, she thinks it's part, not the cure all things, but she thinks it's part of potentially the recovery for this person. I'm one of the people within her team of, you know, she's got hers, the doctor, she's got a nutritional therapist, she's got breathing, she's got yoga, she's got all sorts of people that she can access for the client. But if she thinks that they need to work on their breathing, they come and see me for a few sessions. We do them over Zoom all through the pandemic, so we're not even seeing them in person. And, you know, sometimes after just one, my favorite ones, I had one that they, after the first session, they were like, the next time, so 1 week later, they were like, Jacko, I've got to say, like, it's been ridiculous, like incredible. And it was like, the funniest thing is, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Jacko, but when I got referred to see a breathing coach, I was like, what is that going to do for me? But I'll give it a go. Like, so actually it was starting with a mindset of like, didn't think it was going to do anything. And then, and you know, one of the things that impacted them the most is just as simple as this. They like, we'd noticed that there was quite a few like dysfunctions around like just taking these large like sighs and things in just like a few minutes of conversation. And we talked about just having a pause at the end of those, and the stillness that was created in that pause of just stopping, trying to help his blood gases stabilize a bit. But the space or the stillness that gave him, it was like, and I was like, oh, was that it? That was all you needed. Like, we did some other things as well, but like, of course, that for him. And that's one of the beautiful things about breathing. It's happening all the time. It's not complicated. Depending on so someone that's listening now, depending on where you're at with it, like it may take longer, more effort for us to be able to like restore some of these things, but you can feel some improvements within like one exercise of doing something, and feel a difference and feel better. But over a longer period of time, it probably has those sort of like longer impacts on us where it starts to become part of those habits. You know, I've probably been trying to work on my breathing for like 3 or 4 years, and still even literally this morning when I was doing some I like to just do like I hit snooze on my alarm, and I like do some slower breathing just to set the tone for the day. And even today I felt like I just had my diaphragm, like I just felt like I learned a bit about like just the softness of that movement when I was trying to slow it down, and just I could feel, I felt like I was learning. And it's there for you to carry on improving
100%. That's a topic that keeps on coming up with every conversation that I have with breathing. It's essentially, it boils down to learning awareness of your own body and your own mind. Like, there's the two key factors. Obviously, there's the protocols we can use, the methods we can use to improve things like CO2 tolerance and the way we breathe. But it starts off with that. Just placing the focus on your breathing is going to create some learning for you. One thing that I love to say about breathing is that it's not like any other form of health coaching where they have to try and take something away. You've got to go on a restrictive diet, or you've got to go hard in the gym. It's like, we give people something that is good for them in the moment. It's going to make you feel good in the moment, but also in the long term, it's also going to make you feel good as well. So I see it as a win-win, and that's what I love about it. But I think we had a nice segue into there of, obviously, you said you wake up in the morning, like to do a bit of a slow breathing to set your day. What sort of things are you doing with your current training at the moment, and how have you integrated breathing into that?
So that's a really good question, and one that I'm very passionate about, trying to help people make breathwork just normal. Like, not like this thing is, it's not like, okay, you might go and do a yoga class, or you might do a Pilates class, or you might go for a run. Like, they're all additional things within your day that you're going to like do an activity or do something. You're always breathing when you're doing those things. So rather than being like, okay, on Monday evening I'm going to do some breath work, and it might be that you do some like sessions where you like spend some time doing something specific, just breathing, but for the vast majority of us, it's about improving the way that I breathe when I'm doing stuff already, and using the thing that you're doing as a tool to help you focus or improve your breathing, or challenge your breathing, because we get better by challenging it and getting better from it. And so if we can do that in terms of weave it in to the stuff that people are already doing, whether you're a professional sports person or whether you're not, it doesn't matter. We all have the same challenges. Of, if I ask you, I love what you said there about, like, with breathing, you're not taking anything away, but for some people mentally, it's almost like you're asking me to do something more, and making me do more. I'm already busy. Like, that's going to be difficult. Whereas it's like, no, when you're doing X, I want you to breathe like this. When you finish doing that exercise, I want you to try and do this for your recovery before you go to bed. Like, so the things that are potentially extra, but they're not that really much extra, are, I like to top and tail the day. So before doing something before you go to bed, to create that relaxation response, to set a tone for your breathing so that you're going to sleep better. And that's literally whilst you're lying in bed, before you actually fall off to go to sleep, I want you to focus in on your breathing rather than scrolling on your phone. Like, that's not really, okay, we're taking away the scrolling on your phone, but that's not good for you anyway. So that's not like an extra thing, really. It's just like, focus on your breathing whilst you're down, slow the breathing down, and make it slower, make it lighter, make it more gentle. I also like to do, I personally like it and recommend it for when I'm working, like if I'm working one-on-one with someone, I'll talk about doing something to set the tone of your breathing for the day in the morning. So that could look like actually being able to open up and mobilize your rib cage and that type of thing. It might be working on some of those mechanics of breathing, if that's what people need the most, or it might be as well a little bit on like the speed or the cadence and the like the biochemistry side of it, like trying to slow down and change our sensitivity to carbon dioxide. Or it might just be one of those things. For me, in the morning, and this is just what works for me, is I hit snooze on my alarm. My alarm on my iPhone snooze, I think, is at 9 minutes or something. So I know I've got 9 minutes where I will have done something. If I do nothing else during the day about my breathing, at least I've set that in the morning, and I know that I'll do it before I go to bed at night, because it makes me sleep better. I like it. And that's one of the things, when you feel better from it, then you'll do it. And actually, I'll either might do some very simple, like 4 in, 6 out, following like a breathing bubble on an app. It could be as simple as that. And it depends on how I'm feeling potentially. It could be more box breathing with some, like, either extending the size of the box, or particularly like when I'm trying to work on like improving CO2 tolerance, like having longer exhalations. Or one have been doing a lot of recently, and actually with my pulse oximeter on, is really slowing down the breathing through relaxation at first, as slow, bring it down. See how my feeling of how I'm breathing relates to what my pulse oximeter is actually telling me. Trying to bring it down, and then actually getting to the point of building up some air hunger that's completely manageable and tolerable. And say my SpO2 might have gone from like 98 down to like 96 or maybe 95. But then actually then just continuing to slow it down and then starting to minimize it. So I'm breathing less air in than I actually want, and bring it down a bit further. And then I go through a phase where I'm actually working hard to bring it down. I'm not doing a breath hold, but I sort of am. And interestingly, I can, like so this morning, and I see that the adaptations taking place, I can now much easier, that's the right word, isn't it? It's easier for me to get it down. I'll get down this morning down to 91 in not that much of a struggle, but then it's challenging my diaphragm loads of like, I can feel how well in control of that am I, alongside the emotional response of like, it feels like I want to breathe, and just that CO2 tolerance or sensitivity to it. And what I've noticed with that is having quite an impact on my, on then the other parts of my breathing training. So when I then go and do breath holds, like without training, like I went through a phase where I actually didn't do breath holds and was just working on this, and then went back to breath holds after a few weeks, and like my breath holds like were way better. Yeah, okay. I'm still working on that CO2 tolerance.
Still getting the adaptation in the body.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's great. It's actually really quite interesting to do it with the pulse oximeter. You see the delay in the feeling and sensation before it actually circulates and gets through to your pulse oximeter. And emotionally, what you think that air hunger feeling gives you, and what you think that must be, it's like, oh, my bloods must have really dropped now because I feel like I need to breathe a bit more. And then you're like, no. It's like, well, if normal is 99 to 95, I'm still well within normal here.
It's amazing the feat of how far the human body can go with this. I think there's a paper where they did a case study on a yogic where he did 30 seconds in, 30 seconds out for an hour straight. And they looked at his blood gases, and his blood gases were like, for someone who just come off 5 sets of Wingate tests, 30-second sprints all out, his CO2 was through the roof, his acidity was all over the place, and he was just there breathing calm, relaxed, like been doing it for 17 years, mind. But but like, we're out, and that's not something we've ever really thought about in terms of blood gases. We look at blood gases and go, if CO2 is rising, that's bad for us, we shouldn't do that. No, but it's not right. It's we can have that adaptation, and you can say that can lay over into the other types of things you do with your training.
Yeah. So what I'll notice, and this is from my own self, and working with athletes, is that when I'm able to manage my breath better, when I'm able to train the diaphragm, improve the functionality of the diaphragm and strength and endurance of the diaphragm, like I'm able to facilitate when I'm then exercising. So I might be running. I ran my first like coastal marathon last year. When I'm needing to get a lot of air in, like I've trained that respiratory, the ability to actually do that. Like, so I'm training the efficiency of how it comes in, but then also as part of that, I'm training my ability to tolerate the additional CO2 that's being built up during exercise. So it's not, that CO2 is not sending my breathing out of whack into like, I can't catch my breath now. Plus I'm attacking it from the other side as well. We're like working on how well I can expand the rib cage. The more I can expand the ribs, the more I can increase that lung capacity. And when we've been working on challenging our breathing separately away from exercise, because it can be quite difficult. You challenge your breathing in exercise initially, like you haven't practiced the two things separately. So you've done plenty of exercise before, but practice your breathing. okay, I've got quite good control of my breathing now. I can make myself feel out of breath by lying still, by changing my breathing. So I can control my breathing. Then I start exercising, and I know what it's going to feel like when exercise is going to make my breathing go out of control, and I know how to control that. And I've practiced it separately. Together now, my exercise is then just going to expose how well am I actually at controlling my breathing. And when you've worked on how much you can get in, when you've worked on your CO2 tolerance, managing that airflow starts to become an enjoyable experience. And when I was training for the marathon, I did all of my training. I was trying to stay at a heart rate of 180 minus age. And that correlated nicely with, so I'm like 39, so 141.
Yeah.
That correlated nicely with what I could actually manage airflow with the nose. Yeah, okay. And what I was noticing was, as time went on, that was a slow pace to start with, but gradually it was like if I was going up a hill and my nose was starting to struggle a bit with the airflow, it's like I'd look at my heart rate, and it's like, again, my heart rate's gone up to like 150, 160. Like it's nudging that through when I can't manage that airflow. But then what I was noticing as I started to like practice this and hone this, and like I wasn't bothered about how fast I was going. I was like, it was my running pace and whether I was like going, right, you've succeeded in this, was like, have you managed the airflow through your nose? And as time went on, I was noticing that I would just be running at what my nose could manage. And then a few weeks later, I look at my watch and I'm like, okay, I was running 6-minute Ks before. Now I'm running 5.5-minute Ks. And then what's my heart rate? Oh, my heart rate's still at what it was before. So like, it's proof to me that like I can feel that I feel more efficient, but it's the numbers are also telling me that I'm more efficient. Now, what's your recovery like when you finish a run like that? Well, I almost feel like I haven't got anything to recover from because I haven't got to that point of being completely out of breath. So my recovery is starting to improve. I'm training now for an ultra where I've added Anglesey in Ireland and Wales, 135 miles is the coastal route all around it in 3 days. So that's happening in September. My training is, I'm taking that same approach where, so for the marathon, not on purpose, I just ran out of time. I never ran more than half a marathon in my training. So it takes a long time to run more than that, if you know what I mean. So it was like, I just hadn't got the time. I didn't have the time to do it. So I ran out of time for that. But all of my training had been done in that way of like, I wasn't killing myself to get there. And I remember during the actual marathon, running along and speaking to this lady, and she looked like she'd done this a few times. So I was like, oh, and she's like, yeah, she's done loads of marathons. She was like, how about you? I was like, well, it's my first one. She said, oh, how's it going? And I was like, well, it's quite exciting because we were like 21K in or something, 22K. And I was like, it's quite exciting for me right now because I've never ran this far before. She was like, what? Like, she was like, take it easy. Like, this is unknown territory. And I was like, well, I feel all right because I've ran this far, but not felt like I had to stop and was dying. So my approach for this ultra is, my training is I'm doing the whole thing with the same thing with managing airflow and managing my heart rate and that. But my goal of success is when I finish the run, however long it is or wherever it is, when I finished it, can I truly answer the question, right, could you do that all again? So I'm trying to, whatever run I do, it's like finish and be like, I could do that again. You know, so did like do a 10K and just finish 10K and go like, could you do that again? Yeah. I'm planning to do a 20K one tomorrow, and it's going to be quite hilly, so it's going to be quite interesting. But to finish it and be like, can you do that again? Because the challenge is, I'm going to, for this ultra, like I'm going to have to do it all again 3 days in a row. So that's the challenge.
Mate, I think that's one of the benefits of switching over to nasal breathing once you become adapted is that you do almost feel like it's like, wow, okay, that was quite easy. Like, not saying easy, but I remember the first time I really started to look into going, right, in exercise, I'm going to go nasal only. I'd followed a guy called Jason Donaldson. I don't know if you've come across him or not. He's over in Perth in Western Australia. He was a part of the guys who set up Shift Adapt. And
I think I have done. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
And he started posting like a few workouts and just saying, you know, do this nasal, do that. And I just finished a powerlifting competition. So at the time I was 103 kilos and I hadn't done any cardio for a while. But was like, I'm going to do, I want to get back into being able to move again. I want to lose the weight. I want to get back down to actually, having a bit of cardiovascular fitness. And I said, I'll just try this exercise. I'll just try this routine. I had a few burpees in there, I had some wall holds, and it was all nasal breathing. I did it at very slow pace. But by the time I'd finished, I was like, that's not usually how I feel after I do cardio. Usually after cardio, I feel like I'm scared because I'm having to catch my breath. And I was like, there's something to this. And I started to build upon that slowly. And then I think just watching your stuff as well, being a bit inspired by just going for longer runs and seeing how it goes. I ended up entering a competition. It was only a 3K run followed by a swim, followed by another 3K run, and a bit of a high intensity workout. But I said, I'm going to do the run nasal. I'm going to do it all nasal. I got 2 minutes in, this guy next to me starts talking, and I'm like, I can't talk. I'm meant to be breathing through my nose. No. And I was like running alongside him. I just dropped back a little bit just so the guy didn't think that I was just ignoring him. but honestly, by the time I'd finished the whole thing, I said to myself, that was nowhere near as hard as I thought it was in my head. And I generally think that's down to the nasal breathing. So it makes I think it really does have an impact. And the literature says that as well. There's some old literature from 1990s where meditative brain states appear during nasal breathing and exercise and things like that, and it all makes sense.
You feel calmer, the system is less stressed, the nervous system is less stressed. We're not in that like stressful breathing cycle. It's more efficient. I don't think it's one thing. It's hitting from a few different angles, isn't it? But ultimately, and that to say, like, I've had a number of people like report that back, like, I've went on the, like, normally when I go on the, like, whatever machine in the gym, like, I find it flipping horrendous. And like, I tried it nasal, now it was wicked. Like, it's amazing. Can't believe it. But at the same time, there's a lot of other people out there that will try, like I did. I tried to run to the end of my road nasal breathing, which is like 50 meters away. And there was like snot pouring down into my mouth. It was horrendous. And I was like, this is terrible. Like, nasal breathing for me, running when I started, was not good. But I didn't then pack aside and take the note of like, oh, well, nasal breathing is not for me. If that is you, it means it's even more important that you work on it, because someone that tries to nasal breathe for the first time and finds it fine, well, actually, they're probably nasal breathing. They just weren't aware of it before. They're just thinking about doing it now, and then they can do it. Those of us that really struggle with it, means you've not been using it, you've become maladapted. And it's really important for not just your exercise performance and recovery and all those things. It's really important for your like everyday health and well-being that you can breathe through your nose. The trying to do it whilst you're exercising is just expose the fact that you're not doing it, and take it as a bit of an alarm bell. If it's really, really hard, this is something I need to do something about. I need to actually, your nose is designed for breathing. It's not like left and right-handed people. There's loads of right-handed people in the world, but there's still like, there's left-handed people in the world, and like, which hand you use, like, you can use either one. It's not like there's some people the nose is really good for them for breathing, and other people they're designed for mouth breathing. Like we all have the function of the nose the same. You might have differences in the size of your airway and things. It might be easier or harder for some people, but ultimately all of us, our nose is designed for breathing. But if we've stopped using it, then it will have become maladapted.
100%. So I do want to move on into the sporting context. Now, I think I wrote that article about Sergio Aguero and how there could be the links between mouth breathing and cardiac issues. And there was a whole section dedicated to cardiac in the oxygen advantage. And I sent it over to Patrick, and he loved it. And what I got, to be honest with you, I got a lot of shit for that because of everyone's saying it's the vaccination, and I'd not even followed his story to do with him and all that things, but we won't go into that anyway. But there one comment was made, and I think it really gives us a question to consider, and something that you can give back. He said, well, in sport, aren't they meant to talk, and aren't they meant to shout at each other and meant to communicate? So how do you expect them to keep their mouth closed all the time? And the person wasn't getting the fact, trying to breathe nasally when you can in that situation. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts of integrating nasal breathing into the sporting context, and maybe just breathing protocols into sporting context, maybe warm up during game, post recovery.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that's important, is we understand that nasal breathing can be more efficient. There are, some studies that most people can work to sort of 80 or 90% of their like max. And there's a nice one that Dallum did in, was it 2018, with VO2 max with triathletes that had been practicing nasal breathing, adapted to it, and then they were able to, you know, they were working at their VO2 max test, comparing nasal breathing and mouth breathing, and they were able to do more and more efficiently with nasal breathing. And then we can get a little bit down a rabbit hole of and thinking that nasal is the only way. And I've probably been there in the past before of like, oh, don't ever open your mouth. And I'll be doing stuff like running up a hill going, and like my breathing, I was managed to keep my mouth closed, but my breathing was awful during it. And how did I feel at the top of the hill? I felt horrendous because I'd made it a very stressful event. So it's if we understand nasal breathing as like, okay, yeah, it's how we should be doing at rest. It's going to form our foundation of breathing for good quality breathing, and how we breathe during exercise is going to be built upon your foundation. It's actually going to expose how well you are breathing at rest. You don't start exercising and start breathing better if you're a poor breather at rest. And so in things like in our warm-ups, in our cool downs, like we can be utilizing our nasal breathing. We can do things in recovery periods where we might use nasal breathing to challenge our breathing recovery in training so that we get better for it in the competition or in the game. But if we understand like, why is nasal breathing better? So one of the things is it's going to provide resistance and slow down our breathing. Well, I can breathe through the mouth when I'm like getting to the point where I just need that larger space of airway to be able to get air in. But rather than being in that panting state where you never catch your breath because you're breathing so fast, I can still breathe through the mouth, but I can breathe in a way that is still using better mechanics. I can still be using my diaphragm, not go to that shallow upper chest breathing. I can breathe in my diaphragm, and I can make it slower, and I can be quite purposeful about how I efficiently get oxygen in and manage that CO2 by mouth breathing when the nose can't facilitate that anymore. And particularly when you're working in contact sports where, you know, people's noses might be all smashed up and stuff as well. And if we think that, no, you've got to just only breathe through your nose, and they might only be able to work at 50% of their intensity, that's not going to work for them. They need to be able to work at maximum intensity. So it's finding a starting point for us and finding where you can utilize those benefits. But then even when you're mouth breathing or having to switch to mouth breathing, can you use those same principles that make nasal breathing efficiently, but so can you still use the diaphragm? How well can you expand your rib cage? How are you filling that? Are you drawing it in from low down? And then like how you manage the speed that's happening at. And then if you keep working on those things, you're going to be able to, you'll notice that, okay, maybe only for the first part of the warm-up you could nasal breathe, and then the second part of the warm-up the intensity was too high. But over time, like 6 weeks later, it's like, oh, I can do all of my warm-up nasal breathing now, and it feels really good. And you're starting to see some of those adaptations take place. There's some quite like interesting stuff where when we understand that like CO2 relationship and understanding when it's like become too much for me to handle, like, can I offload some of that purposely, like dump like a couple of big breaths to dump out some CO2 that's like sending me out of control once I've like either ran up a hill or whatever it may be, the intensity, and like allow me to regain my breathing. There's some nice stuff like that that's like, again, it's not complicated really, but it's some simple things, but it's just understanding what is happening with those gases and what's causing this, and then how can I potentially use that to my benefit of being quite specific with the way that I breathe. And, you know, I talk with in the sporting context with like from my rugby background, still quite enjoy doing stuff within rugby and talking to a rugby player. If we're on the field and your hands on hips going before the next scrum, like we both know that you're knackered and I'm feeling better than you and I'm going to smash you. So it's like we know that body language wise, even if you know nothing about breathing, how someone's breathing is actually telling you quite a lot about their like state of like fatigue or state of readiness for the next thing. So not only do it well so that you recover more efficiently, but also do it well so that you feel better, and also so that you look better to your teammates, because your teammates don't want to see you looking like that, and also sending a different message to the opposition with your body language of your breathing.
Yeah, I think I was listening to an interview with George Foreman the other day, and he was basically just saying that whenever he knew in boxing to go after someone and knock them out was if they were breathing heavy out their mouth in his ear when they were tied up. He's like, that's it. That's when I went for it. It's the cue.
Exactly. You know it. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jacko. I appreciate us chatting. We've flew through it, come up to 9 o'clock. And so if anyone wants to reach out for you for more information about your services and how you can help them, where do they go to catch you?
Probably like if those are on social media, like Instagram is a good place to find some stuff. I tried to put on some little tips and training things that people can to try out on there. So that's Jacko Human Flag. From my original love of, as I say, from human flags, like we said at the start. If you want to send me some abuse, TikTok is very good for that. You mentioned when you said like you were like, oh, what's this thing? Like I've had quite the number of comments on TikTok tends to be more like, what? No, breathe. It's not to do with carbon dioxide, mate. Like it must be oxygen. So there's quite a bit of that on TikTok, which is always fun. And then my website is rootedlife.co.uk. I've got a free better breathing ebook on there for people if they want to like. And if you're starting out and you want to get some help with some of the basics, there's an ebook there with some information and links to 3 videos of 3 simple exercises you can try to get started with.
Awesome. I'll put that all in a link in the show notes and on YouTube and on the podcast, Apple Podcasts and stuff like that. Anyway, all right. Thanks very much. Buddy, I appreciate the talk and I'm glad to manage to dive in and get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, mate, appreciate it. Loved it. Thanks so much.
All right, buddy. See ya.
See you next. Bye.